Welcome to an episode of Socioproctological investigation. What does this mean? Well, proctology is a branch of medical science which specializes in the anus. And people my age, men my age, we are invited into clinics or into hospitals, and there is some prodding and pushing of tubes up the bottom. But I should say that it's completely painless, and also that these are very skilled. Proctologists are really very skilled, and they're saving lives. And I admire them hugely. I'm very grateful to them. And also that this proctological exam, don't worry about it at all. It's not painful, nothing like that. And it won't turn you gay. Or maybe unless, maybe it has. I let you judge for yourself. But what is socioproctology? We know what proctology is. It's something very useful. But what is socioproctology? The answer is that, it's like sociology. In other words, it's something completely useless. It's like science is good, but sociology of science is just shit. It's just, don't do it. It's nonsense. So socioproctology isn't useful. It's about pointing the finger at assholes, saying, look at those bloody assholes, they're academics and shit, completely shit disciplines. And, very often these assholes, they're fine, if you get a bunch of assholes and they're being assholes to each other and shitting on each other, so what? That's cool. Different strokes for different folks. But what happens when academic assholes, when they latch on to two Indian people, two Indian men, Mahatma Gandhi and Boddhisattva, Dr. Ambedkar? What happens when philosophers and philosophers, a philosopher is somebody with slender wisdom from the Greek? What happens when these guys, they latch on to two very important people, two people who have helped shape modern India? What happens when they say, oh, well, I'm going to tell you about Gandhian philosophy, or Ambedkar's, I'm going to explain using Deleuze and Guattari and Foucault, and that why Ambedkar was a fool. This is what's happening. That Gandhi is praised, but Ambedkar is depicted as a babbling idiot. Which is bizarre, because you see, Mahatma Gandhi was not a philosopher. You see, he was high school matriculation. He had matriculated, he'd passed his high school. And you see, in those days you could qualify as a barrister by cramming and regurgitating some nonsense. But the main thing that you had to do was you had to come to London or to one of these British cities, and you had to eat dinner. You had to take a certain number of dinners at the Inns of Court. So, the exam itself, if you have a good memory, you just cram it, regurgitate, that's it, you pass. Nobody failed. Unless they wanted to, unless they... Nehru, for example, he said to his daddy, oh, daddy, I don't want to, I'm going to fail the exam. Father said, you damn well pass that exam. Because Nehru had got a degree from Cambridge in botany, in natural science. And father was saying, don't give me that bullshit. Because this is an exam where if you can pass O-levels, if you're a 16-year-old and you can, pass those exams, writing, regurgitating, then you're fine. You could pass that exam. So this was really the qualification that Mahatma Gandhi got was for eating dinner. He ate a number of dinners, and actually everybody liked him because, you see, he didn't eat meat and he didn't drink alcohol. So he'd turn up and Everyone would say, come and join our table, because the wine, there'll be more wine for the rest of us, and there'll be more steak and mutton. But Gandhi was a very good man, and while he was here in London, he joined the Vegetarian Society, and he learned how to propagate the vegetarian philosophy and things like that. But he was not an intellectual. He never said, I'm an intellectual. He'd say, no, I'm not an intellectual. He did say that, look, I'm a Hindu, I was born Hindu, and I don't know Sanskrit. But most Hindus don't know Sanskrit, including the priests. You see, the priest does not necessarily know Panini, Sanskrit, and so on. In fact, we literally want the priest to memorize without knowing the meaning. First, and you memorize it in two different ways. So there's an error-checking mechanism. And in fact, this was deliberate, that we need some people who don't know the language to repeat the hymns and to be like a living library or a tape recorder. And it's transmitted from generation to generation with pretty good fidelity. And what's more, it created a sense of an oikumene, a sense of a common homeland, a heimat, for Hindus, whether they were in Indonesia or in Vietnam, because wherever there were Brahmins, you had the same fidelity of that you were listening to exactly the same thing that a chap in Ludhiana or in Peshawar, he was hearing the same thing from the, because the Brahmins had preserved it exactly. And in fact, the Buddhists who went to China and so forth, they also took this, this type of learning, adapted it for Buddhist scriptures. But by then, for example, if you see the great Chinese poet Du Fu, there was one poem of his, and he's listening to the monks chanting Sanskrit, and he says, well, I don't know Sanskrit. I don't understand what they're saying. But that was true of the Indians as well. What was happening to Du Fu in China was true of most Hindus throughout the history of Hinduism, that you hear it, but you don't understand it. But what Du Fu says is, but I do understand it. I don't know it, but I understand it. And that's also true of... And this is why Gandhi says, look, I've been living the Gita. So that's why I understand it. And I know it better than anybody else. Gandhi knew himself better than anybody else, and he had low opinion of everyone else, which is why it's a good thing in politics. In politics, if you think you're smarter than everyone, that's why you're in politics. If you think you're stupider than everyone, you should quit politics and get a proper job. So Gandhi, yes, he was a Hindu, and for any Hindu, you don't have to know all the philosophy and so on. You can outsource it. Just as a Catholic doesn't have to know all casuistry and theodicy and this. No, because you've got a priest. You ask the priest. If the priest doesn't know, he can ask his bishop. Bishop will ask the cardinal. It's sorted. You don't have to worry about these things. You can carry on. Of course, if you want to write about philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, then you can take anything that he's written and say exactly what is the orthodox view, what are the different commentaries, in which direction is Gandhi going when he says this. So you can map out his trajectory within Hindu philosophy. Now, every single thing in Hindu philosophy by this late stage has its corollary in Western metaphysics and Western ontology and Western philosophy and Western hermeneutics. So, in other words, at this late stage, if you want to write about the philosophy of Gandhi, you can do so. It's a mechanical exercise, you could almost say. Well, not exactly, but a lot of people could do it. But it isn't being done. Nobody's doing it. Which means there's no real interest in finding out what was the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. Instead, there is an interest in building him up as some sort of miracle worker or a shaman or something, and to pretend that, the Indians didn't understand him because they're stupid, they're Indian. How would they understand Gandhi? And saying, no, only some French philosophers or these philosophers or those philosophers have understood Gandhi because they're the right color and the right cultural background. But in the case of, I've written a book which will come out soon called Gandhian Philosophy, the slender wisdom of the philosophers who've written about Gandhi versus Ambedkar's good sense. And if you look at Ambedkar, if you want to say he's a philosopher, you could, because he genuinely was a student of John Dewey, who was influenced by C.S. Peirce. And C.S. Peirce is a great, C.S. Peirce, you could say, is the modern Aristotle. And you can go straight from Peirce through mathematics, and you can get into category theory, you can get into... I'm impressed by William Lavier. Now, there hasn't been... I can't find anything very accessible outside maths. But it would be easy to... I think it would be easy to adapt to do that. And I mention him because, Hegel is the one philosopher who was actually quite sensible for his time. If you actually read what he says, it's not as stupid as Bertrand Russell or other people make out. The problem is that the Hegelians write just rubbish because, they think, oh, he wrote rubbish, so we can just write any old shit. And you have phenomenology, which, you see, in Husserl actually knew some maths. He was going to be a maths. He was supposed to, that was his core competency. But then he, went off in a crazy direction. And it was useless. Heidegger, completely useless. But you see, Heidegger and Carl Schmitt, they are lapsed Catholics. So this is a problem within Catholicism. So it's interesting if you're a Catholic, but not otherwise. Because, the thing is, in Catholicism, you have a buck-stopped epistemology. It's buck-stopped because the Pope or the cardinals and so on, they say, okay, we make a decision on this now. You can't just go on talking nonsense about it. That's it. It's like with the law courts. This lawyer says this, that lawyer says that. But ultimately, there is a bench which can say, well, the buck stops here, we've decided it's this, but the judgment is defeasible. All judgments are defeasible, and this is all that Hegel is saying, sublation. What does it mean? It means defeasibility. That's it. Now, if you look at the theory, firstly, of Gensen in the 1930s, there are 3 or 4 things happening in the 1930s, which, sadly, Ambedkar missed out on that because he's completely immersed in his political career. But I think that Ambedkar would have been very interested, of course, by the Gödel's theorem. Now, what Turing does is also very interesting because he actually shows that there is what Husserl was looking for, which is, an eidetic form of thought. There's a canonical, that some things are canonical and that they are not dependent on the frame of reference. That from any frame of reference, you'll still converge to this. And it's interesting that Turing uses choice sequences, Brouwer's choice sequences. And this, of course, relates to India because Brouwer, who invents all this, I think in 1915, I think, he was greatly impressed by Tagore. And he says, we must have an academy, and we must appoint Tagore as one of the people we must put on it. Because, you see, we need new words. And Tagore is a poet, and he's a universal poet. He's writing in Bengali or something, some Indian language. But people all over the world, in a simplest translation, whether they're children or they're professors, they get it. It's something universal. So, but what is that universality? And of course, Brouwer was an intuitionist. He believed in intuition. And if we really go back to Socrates or to Upanishads and so on, you find that intuition is superior, is considered superior. And the eudoxa, the type of knowledge which is based on intuition, direct intuition, is actually considered fine. Socrates doesn't have a problem with eudoxa. And what he says about categorical thinking, and the word categoros, it's from the law courts. Because, when you take a case to court, And back in those days in Athens, there were sophists who would teach you how to present your case in court so that you win and you score over your enemy. But you see, what is categorical? That means that, it's not enough to go there and say, I think that guy is a murderer. I just kill him. I fucking don't like him. He looks like a murderer. Kill him. Execute him. That's not enough. You have to go there and say, well, at such and such time, at such and such place. Time is a category. Space is a category. Place is a category. Because of such and such motivation, that's another category. Because of such and such opportunity. These are all categorical. So, you have to tick all the boxes saying, well, I've shown that he was there at the right time, the right place, he had the motive, he had the means, he had this. So you're ticking the boxes, and that's how you present your court case. Because the alternative, which back in those days you can just imagine a guy would come up and say, that man, he's a murderer, kill him, execute him. But you can't do that. You've got to show that he actually did something wrong. So, but categorical, this whole approach, what Socrates says is that it's like, if you're in a sailboat, but there's no wind, then you have to use the oars to move the boat. But if you have the wind, you don't need to use the oars, you get there directly without any effort. So this is the second best, what Socrates says is the second best method. But we have to be content with second best methods unless something superior is available. And what we could say is that we use algorithmic, in other words, mechanical decision procedures, only when something superior is not available. And Turing, for example, says, you have a Turing machine which is following a deterministic sequence of logical steps. But if there's an oracle, if there's a Turing oracle, which can confirm that this is, then that's great. That's fine. You can have a non-deterministic procedure, which would be an intuition of some type. And if this is easily verifiable, if you can verify that it's true, then that's it. You don't have to get your knickers in a twist that it's not a categorical reasoning, that it's not an algorithmic reasoning. It doesn't matter, because if you can verify that such statement is true quickly and cheaply, you don't care if you cannot compute it. So computability is one thing, verification is another. Now, these are the sort of, and I mentioned Gensen. Now, Gensen, you see, if you look at a lot of logic, especially deontological logic, logic as applied, that's used in ethics or in moral philosophy. So firstly, this is a deontic or imperative logic. It's not, it isn't real logic at all. Because you're not dealing with elethic statements, you're dealing with imperative statements. But you see, even when you are using elethic statements, in other words, factual, objective statements, Gensen is saying that, look, you can have the Hilbert type logic sequence, which is based on one tautology and finding another tautology. Tautology means a sentence which is always true. So it's there in the definition, as it were. So you're just unpacking a definition. That's okay, that's fine. But Gensen says, no. But you see, if you have conditional tautologies, then you have a sequent calculi. Now, the other point is that, you see, in real life, it's not the case that we have no oikeiosis. Oikeiosis means no natural affiliation, no, natural differences between us. We do. We are born into the world because of mommy and daddy, and we're born as boys or girls or whatever. See, where this arises, John Maynard Keynes, he's a great biologist who, explicated Darwinian evolution, game theoretic evolution. And Maynard Smith, he uses the term uncorrelated asymmetry to describe things like, I own this. It's a historical fact. If you come and try and grab it from me, I'm going to actually put up quite a fight. Because I know that if you rob me of one thing, you'll start robbing me of other things. So at this stage, I'm ready. But you also know that if I have a title to this, then I'm going to fight over this. So you say, oh, yeah, that's yours. Oh. So it's an uncorrelated asymmetry, and it's what's called a bourgeois strategy. If you hang on to your property, that's a bourgeois strategy. If you stand up for your own family, and people say, why is he standing up? It's his own, that's his cousin, that's his brother, oikiosis. He belongs to them, they belong to him. And if he didn't stand up for them, then he himself would be robbed, because people would say he's a spiritless coward. So these are uncorrelated asymmetries, and they give rise to what are called bourgeois strategies. And, when you're a student and you go to college and the professor is trying to be cool and trying to pretend that his hair is, and he's wearing blue jeans and his tummy is bulging, the bastard. And he pretends that the bourgeoisie, the middle class, mummy and daddy, and the middle class values are all horrible and we should have a revolution. Let's have a revolution. It'll be so cool. But it won't actually, it'll be shit. But these bourgeois strategies which arise out of uncorrelated asymmetries, these are important. These are the basis of oikiosis. And what's more, Robert Oman, the great game theorist, he has shown that you get, instead of having Nash equilibria, Nash, the guy in Beautiful Mind, instead of having what are called competitive competitive solutions, you can have cooperative solutions which are not superior. Instead of looking at a equilibrium where you're afraid of retaliation, instead you can have one which is based on public signals which allow everybody to move. They have more information and they're able to do deals and to come up much more peacefully. And this is also related to the folk theorem of repeated games, or Meyerson, who received the Nobel Prize. The basic idea is that anything which can be achieved by coercion can be equally achieved with non-coercive means in a repeated game. So, but coercion is costly. Violence is costly. Now, of course, violence is a learned skill, and it is good to learn the skill, and it's good to have a bunch of people who specialize in violence, not actually doing it, but training how to do it in an asymmetric manner so that one guy can kill 100 or 1,000,000, because then you don't have the violence. Once you have the nuclear weapons, suddenly these two guys aren't having a proper war because mutually assured destruction. So, these are the more recent ideas, and these are all very pragmatic ideas. They are compatible with pragmatism. And pragmatism is basically the idea that the real meaning of whatever worthless shit you're talking, the real meaning of it is its practical effects. And if you have a complete description of all the practical effects, what does it actually mean? Well, here I'll appeal to Yonida's lemma, or to the basic notion of structuralism, which is that if you know all the interactions, then that defines the structure, or that defines the meaning. So this is structuralism, this is category theory, this is all perfectly mathematical, it's all perfectly scientific. And when we turn back to Ambedkar and Gandhi, we find these are historical personalities. Whatever they said it in a context. And there is a way. If we just pay a little bit of attention and are a little bit careful, we can easily see exactly what the trajectory of their thought was. In the case of Gandhi, we can interpret it in terms of Hinduism, because he was a Hindu. He believed in reincarnation. And in the case of Ambedkar, we know that he chose to become a Buddhist. And again, Buddhist logic is absolutely fabulous. And you can immediately find out, because both guys wanted they didn't want bloody caste discrimination and gender discrimination and, injustice. Of course not. So then we can, by using modern logic, the contemporary ideas, not some foolish ideas from 100 years ago, but what is now scientifically accepted, mathematically accepted, accepted by economists, accepted by entrepreneurs, by businessmen, by judges. There's the law and economics tradition. And both Gandhi and Ambedkar, they were lawyers. Ambedkar, of course, was a great economist, and we can do much more with his work. Because, you see, there are two methodological elements to Ambedkar's thinking which are novel. One is the emphasis on what's called Tardian mimetics. That mimetic effects are, Gabriel Tard had the notion that people will try to imitate the superior. And in development economics, it's pretty damn obvious now that the way to get ahead, a country gets ahead, is by mimicking what works for those who were similar to you just a couple of decades before. You imitate. Bangladesh is getting ahead by imitating what sensible countries do. Pakistan is going down the shithole because it's imitating God knows what. In some respects, it's imitating India. Not a good idea. But in others, it's imitating, terrorism. I don't know who started that. The PLO. I don't know. So what I'm saying is that if we use the contemporary knowledge that we have, we can easily repair both Ambedkar's thinking and Mahatma Gandhi's thinking. We can situate them securely within Hinduism, in the case of Gandhi, because he is Hindu, securely in Buddhism, in the case of Ambedkar, and in so doing, using the modern economic theories and so forth, mathematical theories and so forth, you can actually produce something worth reading, which would be helpful. And just as, previously we had a Nehru-Gandhi ideology, which was, if you were doing UPSC, you had to read all that nonsense. But it was okay. After all, Nehru-Gandhi ideology, whatever it may be, it's a success because India is hanging together. It holds together. It's pretty, and we could say there's a Nehru-Ambedkar ideology of the Constitution. Sure, you can say that. Because, Nehru and his father, they made the original contribution, going back to 1928. There are aspects of 1935 British Act in the Constitution, that's also true. But and of course, there is Ambedkar's own contribution and the contribution of other people of the time. And there's a good consensus between them regarding First Amendment and so forth. So you can say there's a Nehru-Ambedkarite constitutional law synthesis, as you know. But let's find out what the Gandhi-Ambedkar synthesis might look like. I'm not saying that it existed, but it's possible. I mean, such a thing is possible. And we might be able to say that how could the dialogue between Ambedkar and Gandhi, how could it have been more productive? And this is an important question for us even today, because in the last 10 years, you can see that there's been at least one big Gandhian movement, which was the Anna Hazare anti-corruption movement, Lokpal movement. So that was Gandhian. But there has also been a lot of attempt to resurrect Ambedkar's plan for a Dalit Muslim alliance, which would turn the Hindus into a minority. Now that's also failed. And, both Ambedkar and Gandhi, Gandhi kept on saying Hindu-Muslim unity, but then it didn't exist. So people thought he's a fool. Ambedkar went on saying, Dalit Muslim unity. And J.N. Mandal, who's very close to Ambedkar, in fact, very helpful to him. But J.N. Mandal sided with Muslim League. So you have a symmetry that Muhammad Ali Jinnah made J.N. Mandal his law minister. Nehru made Ambedkar his law minister. So yeah, they were, But then what happens? J.N. Mandal has to run away from Pakistan along with the Navasudras and they were very badly treated. And later on, the communists, Murray Jappi massacre of these people. And just in the recent Bengal assembly election, you see that many of those Dalits, those descended, they voted BJP because they remember this. So these are, I'm saying that these are things very much with us. They've been there. Ambedkar and Gandhi are part of practical politics, or rather impractical politics which has failed in the last 10 years. But it doesn't have to go on like this. You don't have to have academics writing worthless rubbish and then quoting each other and then writing on each other, cup of aggie, eating each other's shit and shitting each other's, enough. And nor do you have to have all these absolutely worthless Yagendra Yadav. I mean, he's the best of them. But the rest, enough. Stop the pretense. Bas karo bhai. And so this is really the theme of the book, which will be coming out very shortly. Okay, thank you very much. I've taken up too much of your time. Many thanks.